Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber earlier this morning mention to me, hey Jason, there's a video of John Cena up promoting the big three, doing a bunch of pause work, full resets on deadlifts for getting big. That he thinks that's the key to size. So I actually went and checked it out, and I did a little further digging into some of John Cena's other training. I'm familiar with some of it. I just wanted to see what he's promoting, what his trainers are saying he's doing, things like that. And it was pretty interesting because I think for a lot of people out there, we're not talking about bodybuilding, but you're talking about athletic aesthetics, meaning looking like an elite athlete instead of like a bodybuilder per se. Guys like John Cena really exemplify that. So I wanted to see what he's doing. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. Because yeah, I went and watched the video first, and sure enough, you got John Cena doing high bar squats. He is doing some touch and go deadlifts, but then he's also doing some really heavy pause work. But there's a video of him doing pretty much like a touch and go, a little bit sloppy with like 500 pounds on the bench press. There's a video up of him in there in some of these training clips. Squatting would look real close to 600 high bar, and he is going below parallel. He's going pretty deep. He's no slouch in the strength department. I didn't even count the plates on his deadlift, but the guy does conventional deadlifts while wearing weightlifting shoes, so that creates a deficit, right? It makes it a little bit harder. I do the same thing these days. I do a lot of my deadlifting in my actual weightlifting shoes for the same reason. And doing full resets, no touch and go on the deadlifts. So, I mean, he's a real strong dude on the big three. I mean, John Cena could actually go compete in powerlifting meets and do pretty well if he were to just say, hey, I feel like doing some powerlifting. Not that he would, but it's within his ability. Now, I went to look what else he does. You go look at other stuff. What does he promote? His trainers say he does a combination of touch and go bench, pause bench, closed grip bench. He does squats, pause squats, deadlifts, clean and jerk, power cleans, power snatches. I mean, they have him doing a little bit of other stuff. He's doing a little bit of other stuff, you know, some weighted pull-ups. But there's also videos of him out there doing snatches. Not snatches, but I think cleans. I've seen him do cleans with real heavy weight. With real heavy weight. I think the guy cleans something like 400 pounds. I believe there's some footage of him actually cleaning 400 pounds out there, 405. We're talking about a guy who's real strong on the basic lifts. He promotes the basic lifts. And in fact, he said in an interview he doesn't really like doing bicep curls. He's not lacking in arm development. But then again, I mean, you got a guy who can power clean 405. He can bench press around 500 pounds. Now, granted, not meet legal, but we know his meet legal bench would be well over 400. So he's going to have triceps. He's going to have arms. Guy can do weighted pull-ups with pretty heavy weight. And this is a lot of what he does. And the guy's jacked. He's big, he's jacked, he's strong. And I think that's one of the take-home messages. And I think that's where a lot of guys out there mess up because they watch too many bodybuilders who use entirely drugs to build their bodies. And they say things like, well, I don't want to be able to bench 500 pounds. I just want to look like I can bench 500 pounds. But you know, what's the best way to look like you can bench 500 pounds? Is to actually be able to do it. And guys like John Cena can do it. May not be meet legal, but his meet legal is still a hell of a lot higher than most of ours, even if he were to come down and pause it, because he's pretty strong on that pause bench too. So, I mean, he kind of exemplifies it of what does a person look like who can bench press 500 pounds? They look like John Cena. If they get lean. Now, he does a lot of conditioning and his diet's on point and everything, and I think that's the big difference. I think that's what a lot of people miss when we start talking about strength athletes who are brutally strong and brutally powerful, guys who really can squat 600, guys who really can bench 450, guys who are really capable of doing these things. They have an enormous amount of development. Do you honestly think you can hit those sort of numbers? Do you honestly think you can have any weak muscles or small muscles in your upper body and still bench 450? Do you think you can have any weak muscles in your upper body and still hang clean 405? Like, can a person who has underdeveloped muscles in their upper body do that? No. Can a person squat high bar 600 pounds who has any weaknesses anywhere in their core or their lower body? Guy who has weak quads or weak glutes, can he do that? No, of course he can't. So if you have someone who is strong on a number of these big lifts, aren't they going to be well developed? Of course they are. Of course they are. A lot of people say, well, how come this guy or that guy who's really strong, he doesn't look as jacked as I think he should look? Well, maybe because he needs to lose 20 pounds of body fat. But John Cena is an example of a guy who has built all this base, doing big movements, athletic movements, explosive training, training like a real athlete because he is an athlete. What happens when they do some conditioning work and then they diet down, they clean their diet up? What do they look like? Well, they look like John Cena. A perfect example. So these guys out here who are chasing all this physique stuff, you need to understand that if you do become a big, powerful, strong athlete and then you diet down, you're still going to look insane. You're going to look insanely jacked, but you're actually going to be able to function. And then one of the other take-homes there that I'm going to point out, guys who train like this, and in my observations over the years, people will say, well, you know, they're all using drugs. Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are. But how many drugs are they using? Kind of like when I tell guys that in naturals, usually the biggest naturals are usually the strongest, and vice versa. And we've got pretty good studies on that now. Other than these few tiny genetic outliers, the overwhelming amount of the research is showing things like that people who have the most muscle mass relative to their height usually have the highest max squat. There's a direct relationship. It seems to be the most important variable. It accounts for literally 85% of how much you can max squat. Is totally based on a formula of how much muscle you have in your whole body versus your height. Seems to be, it can determine that's 85% of it. Everything else, technique, form, motor unit learning, all that stuff is the other 15%. So we kind of get to this point, well, what happens for people who are on drugs? Same thing. The guys who are the strongest need less drugs to gain the same size. So, I mean, that's something that people need to stop and think about for a moment also. You need to really think that through also. Drugs cost money. Drugs have side effects. If a person decides, well, I'll just use drugs instead of getting really strong, because that is the only way you're going to get there. When someone says, I want to look like I can bench 400 pounds or 500 pounds without being able to do it, that basically means you're going to use a ton of drugs. That's what that actually means. Because the thing is, if you actually do get your bench press to 450, you probably won't have to use as many drugs to get the same look, because size does equal strength. And in my experience, the guys who are the strongest end up putting the most size on less amounts. They spend less money on these things. They have less of them in their possession at any time. So if there's legalities to consider, you can get in legal trouble in a lot of countries for possessing these things. And the amount of trouble you get into is going to depend on the amount you have. So if a person can get away with taking a third of what they would be taking, can get less legal trouble if they do get caught, and less chances of getting caught because they have less of this stuff coming to and from their house or whatever they're doing. Then there's the health effects. I mean, what do you think is going to cause you to die sooner? To use a given amount of drugs that might impact your health, or to use 3 times that amount? Which one's worse for you? It's like saying, you know, I'm going to drink alcohol. I've decided I'm going to drink alcohol. So do I want to drink 3 shots every night, or do I want to drink 9 shots every night? Which one's going to cause you more negative effects? Obviously, drinking 3 times as much. So that's kind of a point to consider there also with this stuff that guys need to consider. But here's your thing. Guys like John Cena, he doesn't train like a bodybuilder. He trains like an athlete. And he looks like an athlete. And ultimately, does anybody look at that guy? Those of you out there who chase this physique thing, does anybody look at that guy and not think, man, that dude is jacked? How many of you guys out there who train for bodybuilding right now don't look as jacked as that guy? And you're not as functional. So again, I think seeing guys like him who train this way, he trains like an athlete, he trains to be an athlete, but he does have to appear shirtless for a living for a long time. Was his whole career around that, appearing shirtless in public for millions of dollars. And he still didn't really train like a bodybuilder. Why? It wasn't necessary. He trained like an athlete, and he looks like an athlete. And that's the difference when we talk about what does an athlete's physique, a serious athlete's physique, look like instead of a bodybuilder. And I think what most people are going to find when you're talking about appeal to the masses, athletic look wins out. And granted, he's on the big end of that, but the athletic look is going to appeal more to the general populace, and something that you can't discount with all this stuff. So again, I find it interesting though, because we look at his size, you look at his physique, and a lot of people out there might assume this is a guy who trains like a bodybuilder, and then you go look and this is a guy who does maxes on bench press, maxes on squats, deadlifts, power cleans heavy, power snatches, does clean and jerks, and doesn't like to do curls. Speaks volumes. Speaks volumes. So when people say, well, a person can't train that way and still look good, they say silly stuff like that, but then you look at someone like him and say, okay, well, there's your answer to that. Are you sure about that? I think you're wrong. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.